We have an international guest who has been very, very gracious and is up at 3 a.m. in the morning currently to present our session today. So I am deeply grateful for our next speaker, Paul Dutoit, CSP and Global Speaking Fellow. So with the publication of the revised and expanded version of The Exceptional Speaker, How to Deliver a Sensational Speech in early 2021, co-authors Paul Dutoit and Alan Stevens have dissected the art of speaking from just about every angle. Paul provides a clear message that produces the desire and willingness to change and to act. He's the author of 3 books, including You Can Present with Confidence and The Exceptional Speaker, also co-authored with Alan Stevens. And Paul blogs regularly on the presentation skills and customer service, with many articles being published in South Africa and internationally. Paul is a founder member and past president of PSA Southern Africa, and is an honorary fellow of PSA UK. So please welcome to the screen, Paul.
Professional Speakers Australia, good afternoon, I believe it is. It's very much the morning here. I'm going to be chatting to you today on the topic of harnessing your anxiety, and I've selected the topic title carefully because the word anxiety has quite a negative effect. It has a negative connotation to it. And I'd like to show you how you can take anxiety, which is for the most part negative, and harness it to your benefit. And the way I'm going to do this is to separate it into 2 categories, if you like. And the categories are the things that are within your control and the things that are outside of your control. So I'll spend most of my time, probably obviously, on the former, but I'm going to start off with the latter. So I think just to kick off with, we'll be looking at the things that are outside of your control. And there we go, as it's outside of our control. And it's going to cause me to need to move my picture slightly and do something a little bit different with it. So let me just play around with it quickly. There we go. And I'm going to slightly change how it comes across. And there you can see a skier having a nice crash into the snow. Things that are outside of your control. There are 3 that I want to discuss initially. The first one is time. And what I'm really referring to here is when one is setting up to deliver a speech, whether it's online or whether it's live in front of an audience. Time is fairly critical in making sure that you prepare yourself properly, that you rehearse properly, that you've got all your logistics in place, your travel, and the preparations leading up to the time that the actual event starts. Now, what I like to do is to plan how long all these things are going to take. And the general rule, in order to take the pressure off yourself, is that whatever that amount of time is that you have necessary, take it and multiply it by 1.5, and you'll find that a lot of the things that are seemingly outside of your control become in your control because you don't have time pressurizing you. So that's the first. The second one is clutter. And we speakers are a little bit guilty of trying to perhaps overdo the content. We have all this tech, 3 microphones, 4 screens, 5 computers, 7 cameras, and so on and so forth. Now, I think that's wonderful. If you've got it under control and you know what you're doing, just remember that every single piece of tech that you have adds just a tiny bit of extra pressure, and you need to perhaps ask yourself, do you really need that additional pressure? I tend to be a little bit of a minimalist. I use what I need, and I try and declutter as much as possible, particularly when it comes to things like slides. And then the last one, interestingly, and I think inevitably, is attitude, because however well planned an event is, and I've attended some marvelously well planned events, what you tend to find is that things inevitably, there'll be something that just goes a little bit pear-shaped, that goes wrong, that doesn't go quite as you were planning for it to go. And I think the overriding attitude needs to be that no matter what happens, you're going to retain your composure, you're going to be friendly, you're going to be happy, and that when eventually you do manage to be on screen, that you're going to, or live in front of your audience, that you'll be able to deliver the best possible talk in the most friendly manner and come across as if you're completely in control. Of course, just going back to time, the one thing that you shouldn't multiply by 1.5 is the slot that you've been given to talk. In fact, what often happens is that you might be asked to reduce your talk from 40 minutes down to 30 minutes, for instance. And the question is, can you do that? Because you can't get rid of your introduction, nor can you get rid of your conclusion. So inevitably, let's say you have 5 points that you want to make. One of the things that you can do is say, right, well, I'm going to reduce that to 3 points. But you do need to know up front which are the 2 points that you can actually leave out. So let's move now on to the things that are inside of your control. And I've selected specifically 5, shall we call them anxiety scenarios, things that are within your control. I'm not claiming that these are the only ones, but I'd like to discuss them. And as you come up with other things that create anxiety, you can apply this kind of mindset shift approach to being able to deal with them. So they are, firstly, intimidation, just going blank. I'm sure that's happened to you at some stage. Feeling that you're short on content, what your response is to that, getting caught out during question time, and then finally, just the fear that you might not be interesting, that it might be boring, and that you might just be dull. So let's look at intimidation, which is the first one. And I've got 3 things under intimidation that tends to happen to us and make us really dry up and be fearful of our audience. And the one is, if you've landed an engagement at a really high fee. Now, what's interesting about getting a high fee, well, it's very nice because hopefully you'll be paid on time and you'll have some money to be able to pay your bills. But the remarkable thing is that usually just about every member of that audience has no clue whatsoever as to what you've been paid. And the approach that I like to take as a speaker is to say to myself, well, the audience doesn't know what I've been paid. Even if I'm doing a pro bono event, I'm going to put as much effort and preparation into this engagement as I would any other engagement, because you just never know who might be in that audience. Then there's the fear of speaking to people that are high profile. You might think that there's a lot resting on the engagement. You want to make a very good impression, and that obviously puts a fair amount of pressure on you. But I'm always comforted by the reality that it doesn't matter how high a profile you have, you're still going to bleed, you still need to eat and drink, and you still need to sleep at night. And I can think of a whole lot of other things to share with you, but I think you get the drift. So finally, the fear of the big audience. And this to me is an interesting one, because essentially, when you're speaking to an audience, all you're doing is you're speaking to a combination. In other words, a collection of individuals. So if it's 50 people, it's one person times 50. If it's 500 people, it's one person times 500. But if I'm in your audience, I can tell you that all I'm really interested in is how your message is coming across to me. So being intimidated by how much the fee is, how high profile your audience is, or how big your audience is something that you can overcome by psychologically planning it in your mind. And what you really want to do is you want to have a kind of a laser focus on that one individual, as if you're just speaking to one person. And if you can do that, well, it doesn't really matter. You could be speaking to 1 million people and it'll be exactly the same. So the next one is the fear of going blank. And this can happen in a number of different ways. I'm just going to select 2 to discuss with you. The one is when you're going along nicely and something that you say triggers you to tell a little story. So you now go off on a different branch. I'm sure this has happened to you, particularly if you've been doing a lot of speeches. and you find yourself at the end of the branch, and then suddenly you can't remember what the story was supposed to, the point that it was supposed to illustrate. Now, if you get stuck in a scenario like that, it's pretty simple. Just say to the audience, I seem to have sidetracked myself. What was the point I was trying to make? And almost inevitably, somebody will help you out. Everyone will have a laugh, including yourself. No harm is done, and you can continue. And what it really does, which is so nice, is it makes you look human. So from that point of view, there's no problem going blank. But if you have the big freeze, and I have seen it happen on, I saw it happen once at NSA some time ago, where the speaker just hit a complete, it's like your computer freezes completely. You stop, your mind goes blank, there's just nothing there, and you can't think where to go next. Well, this would happen because of planning going back, and it's very difficult to come back from there unless you have something that can help you, like some notes, for instance. So one of the strategies that we use, in fact, is to use cue cards. And all I'm going to do is just run through a few things that you can do in order to assist you in using cue cards efficiently. And I'm not saying that as a professional speaker, you always need to get up there with cue cards. What I am saying to you is that it's a great tool to use in rehearsal stage because you've got the cue cards at your side. It helps you to get your flow going nicely. If you're flying to a particular venue, they never ask you to close your cue cards because the aircraft's coming into land. You can still be busy doing your preparation. They're just wonderful things to have. And here's the marvelous thing about cue cards. You can take them with you on stage and put them next to you on a table, and you'll find that just psychologically, because the cue cards are there, you won't ever need to refer to them. But if you don't have them, of course, the likelihood of you going blank increases. So just a few notes on using cue cards that are pretty valuable. The one is just write on one side of the card. Use trigger words and don't write too much stuff. So just 2 or 3, maybe 4 words on a line. Write bold and in lowercase. Lowercase is so that you can read it easier. The eye just picks up lowercase quicker than it does capitals, and bold so that you can see it. Your cards should be numbered. If you prefer to number the points, then you don't have to number the cards, but it's just in case they get muddled up. Don't gesture with the cards in your hand. In other words, use the free hand to gesture, and the hand that's holding the cards, just keep that still. And then finally, you don't want more than 6 points on a card. Otherwise, it starts getting difficult. And then you can see probably there's a little plus there, and that's to remind me that I've got a particular point to share with you about that, and that is this. If you are doing a new speech and you've decided that you're going to hold the cue cards in your hand just to give you a bit of comfort, then it's important not to read from the cards. In other words, don't look down and be reading from the cards. So the rule is when your mouth is open, your eyes need to be up. So the technique is you look down, you pause, you look down, you get the idea, you speak. And the advantage of that is it just gives you a moment to think about what you're going to say. And by the same token, it gives the audience time to absorb what you've just said. Because most of us speakers, when we get enthusiastic, is that we start speeding up, and sometimes we can lose our audience. So let's move. So there it is. When your mouth is open, your eyes are up. So let's move to the next one, the fear of not having enough content. And this is quite a bugger, because when we're afraid of that, we do something that is intensely stupid. And that is that we add just a little bit more content in so that we won't run out of content. And that has the effect of putting us under pressure, because we get halfway through our talk and we realize we're only a third of the way through our content, and we start rushing. And as a result of rushing, the audience loses us completely, and they start fiddling around with their phones, and your end comment is not going to make any impact. Now, I just want to put up a picture there for you. And what's remarkable about perfume is that when you go and buy a bottle of perfume, the purchase price is about 15 times the value of what is actually in the bottle. And it's Coco Chanel that coined the phrase, less is more. And she's absolutely right, because whatever you're paying for that perfume, is 15 times more what you should have. In fact, they say that 7% of the price of the perfume is actually in the bottle. The rest is the packaging, the marketing, and all sorts of things. So what you really should look at doing is just focusing on your main message, have a few supporting points, and give yourself the time to be able to talk about it easily. You'll probably recognize this fellow, and he has plenty of questions to answer. The purpose of talking about questions is that there's some engagements where questions come about, and the big fear here is that somebody might ask you a question that you cannot answer, and it makes a lot of speakers very fearful. I just want to ask you this. Who told you that you need to be the world's absolute expert on the topic that you're speaking to, and that you should be able to answer every single question? The reality is, not even a PhD knows the answer to every question that might be asked about their topic. So release yourself from that pressure. If you're in a scenario where you get asked a question that's difficult to answer, please don't wing it. Just say, I can't answer that question. I don't have an answer for you. Let me do some research and I'll come back to you. The other way of doing it, of course, is if you have a very learned audience, you can throw it out to the audience and say to them, is there anyone that can help me here? Because that's quite a tricky question. And you'll often find that someone might come out and help you. Just a little tip with regard to handling questions. If you want to just give yourself a little bit of time to frame your answer so that you don't go into a long tirade, which will make it look as if you don't know what you're talking about, just first summarize the questions. Questions are often quite long, and it just helps the audience to get a grasp on it, and it tells the listener that you've understood the question effectively or not, as it may be. And then the next one is being dull and boring. All I'm going to do is to share a few things that you can do to make sure that you are not dull and boring. A lot has got to do with the way you project yourself and the way you use your voice. But here are a couple of things. Firstly, have some structure. In other words, have a clear beginning, have a clear conclusion, and make sure that your content is interesting. It's always good to put a few stories in if you can, and you can in fact do that in the introduction or the conclusion, and usually the body. So having a good structure is important because then people can follow your flow. Make sure that you're speaking clearly. That stands to reason. And with regard to belief, I think it's quite important that you not only believe in yourself and your ability to get across to your audience, but that you also believe in the topic that you're speaking about and that you're able to show it. And then, of course, that leads us to enthusiasm. If you're a bit of a dead fish, well, you are going to lose your audience. So the best way to do it is to record it. You can do it with a camcorder or a digital voice recorder. And what I like about the digital voice recorder is that you can play that back in your dead time and actually listen to how your voice comes across. And if you end up crashing into a pole, well, then you were deadly boring, and you need to do something about it. So that really leads us to humor. Because there's nothing wrong with putting a bit of humor in, but really, folk, as a professional speaker, you don't need to be a comedian, but you can be lighthearted. And just remember, if there's a really good crack that comes from the audience, you always get the best joke coming from the audience. So laugh at it. Don't try and compete, because invariably you might get caught on the wrong foot and you might lose that one. So just go along with it and be lighthearted, bring humor into your presentations. And then lastly, don't waffle. Make your point, you might expand on it, and then you move on. So the 5 anxiety scenarios, I'm going to put them up now, but just before I do, one of the most important things about giving a speech is that what we're aiming for is one central main message. And if you've only just joined us, or perhaps you've been busy doing something else, or you've been distracted, I'm about to give you the one main message. So this is the time to really pay attention. So we've had the following. I'm going to go from the last one to the first one. You don't want to be dull because you don't want to look like an idiot. Okay? You don't want to get caught out during question time because obviously you'll look foolish. And you don't want to feel that you're short of content because you won't know, you'll look as if you don't know what you're talking about. You also don't want to go blank because you look like a real fool. And you don't want to feel intimidated by high-level people or a big audience or what have you, because you don't want to look stupid. So what I'm saying to you is that these 5 things and others that might crop up are almost like tributaries to the main river that lead in to the one single primary fear that we have. And that primary fear is making a fool of myself. So if you can frame anxiety from a point of view that everything that creates anxiety to a greater or lesser extent has something to do with us not wanting to make a fool of myself, it helps you to manage it a lot better. And if you're looking for the remedies of not making a fool of yourself, well, I think it's pretty obvious. It goes back to adequate planning. And the planning might be around logistics. It might be around rehearsal. It might be around all the things that you need to do in order to prepare yourself adequately for your speech. But if you know that you have a good speech to give, you've prepared adequately, you've given yourself that 1.5 times the amount of time that you need, I think it's inevitable that you probably won't make a fool of yourself. But just psychologically, let's go back to how this really comes about. And if you had to ask someone about their schooling days and ask them what they fear the most or what they feared the most at school, most people would probably struggle to articulate that. But for me, I know quite simply that my biggest fear, over and above anything else, failing exams, getting a hiding, whatever the case may be, it was not having someone to talk to or play with during break time. And the reason for that is that we are social human beings. We have this deep need to belong, and we don't want to be isolated. We don't want to look like a fool, and we don't want to be insignificant. And this is what is in the background of just about all the anxiety we have. We don't want to be sidelined. In fact, what we want is to be validated and to feel that we are important, that we count, that we're significant, and actually that people care about us. So this is a great way to approach anxiety. Ask yourself all the time, am I doing things that are going to bring me across in the best possible light? Or am I doing things that are effectively going to sabotage me? So what I'm going to look at now is possibly the best possible remedies that you've got. And before I go any further, here's a great one. If you can have a nice glass of fresh, clean water next to you, never iced, always either shelf temperature or lukewarm, you just take a nice mouthful. It makes you pause and it helps you to relax just as you feel that nice water just draining through you. So that's one of the methods. But you've probably anticipated what I'm going to be speaking about, and it has a lot to do with breath and or breathing. So just very simply, breath is what creates sound. So our diaphragm presses or pushes the air through the trachea, over the trachea, through the larynx, and it allows us to create the most incredible sounds. We can sing like an opera star. We can use all sorts of different accents. We can do loud and soft. So it's breath that helps us to do these things. So logically, if you can do a little bit of deep breathing before you start, it's going to help to relax you. Now, if I can just mention this to you, and that is that when we become nervous or anxious, the nervousness goes into our extremities, our fingertips and our feet and toes. As a result, we tend to shuffle around, we tend to fiddle with our hands. What we actually need to do is to psychologically say to ourselves, thanks, I'll have that energy coming out of my hands and feet and going back to my diaphragm, which is where it's needed. Now, the diaphragm is one of the most powerful muscles in the body, and it is absolutely critical for a speaker, because if you have your diaphragm under control, then you're going to give a far better speech. So one of the things that I'm going to encourage you to do is just a few minutes before you're due to start, plant your 2 feet on the ground, put your shoulders back. It's not a bad idea to just give yourself a little bit of a neck massage like this, and then in through the nose, a big deep breath, hold it, and then gently out through the mouth, emptying your lungs completely. And you do that 5 times. and you will find a remarkable thing happens. As your lymphatic system becomes powered up, as your red blood corpuscles receive more oxygen, you'll feel a little bit more relaxed and you'll feel a little bit more awake, and it's going to help you. And obviously you can do things like your voice exercises and that before on the way there, but this is for just a few minutes before you're due to start. Okay, so just as my parting word to you, I want to mention this to you, and this is one of the most valuable things that I ever found out at the beginning of my presenting and speaking career. We tend to have this herd mentality, if you like, that strangers or people that we don't know are intimidating and they might want to harm us. The reality is that if people have taken the time and the trouble to come and listen to what you have to say, they really are anticipating something good. And if we can go into a talk with a feeling that our audience wants us to do well, there's nothing to stop us from giving a great speech and totally bowling them over. So thank you for having me. Professional Speakers Australia, my name is Paul du Toit. I'm the author of You Can Present with Confidence and the Exceptional Speaker. And Mr. MC, over to you.
Thank you, Paul. Very much appreciate that. I know it was very condensed and very tight, but I think there were some wonderful nuggets in there. I particularly like that last point around that the attitude of the audience is to do good by you. That's a really important thing in terms of reassuring ourselves